this revelation. It's showing us something about ourselves and about our world, the underlying structures in our world that seemingly are keeping it together and are seemingly, sustainable and stable, are being revealed as anything but. So the point is that there's something really, really deep that's being touched inside of each one of us through what's happening in the world.
Once you become aware that a lot of mass events are steered or are triggered by covert operations, once you're aware that that is a phenomenon that happens, then you can just immediately start looking at one of these situations and looking to see if it has those kinds of signs.
Western societies in particular are finding it very difficult to deal with the unknown, to deal with problems, and tend to avoid facing up to the challenge of building some kind of a more confident society that can deal with the problems of the future. And instead we tend to continually retreat.
As soon as I was back to earth, crashing down to earth as it were, most people say to me, "Oh, you must have felt disappointed that you couldn't have stayed in that beautiful place that you've been to." But of course, yeah, the part of me was, but ultimately I was just so charged with the energy of what had happened, and that I just couldn't wait to sort of find out what my purpose was and why it had happened.
Then I think the nature of our time in history is that we are taking down categories of boundaries between science and religion, using technology coming out of the scientific world today, and to explore questions that classically have been attributed to the religion.
All our civil liberties were taken away from us more or less overnight. One thing that really struck me at Easter time was that the churches were closed. When Jesus Christ said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I also," that couldn't happen. Now, what kind of interests would find it to their own advantage for such a situation to develop?
The agendas as expressed will seek to stop some of these systems, and they will interfere with the freedom to do some of these things. These may not be tolerated if we don't change the discourse. So we have to begin to support each other seeking to do those things.
So yes, there is this basic idea that there is something that's eternal. This cannot be anything in the visible or material world, because nothing there is permanent. So everything is changing. There's no object that you can point to that will last forever. So there must be something other than that is eternal. You could identify this with God. God is where everything comes from. God is the source of everything. The further you go into yourself, the closer you, shall we say, come to the absolute. What you are looking for is what is looking.
I can remember reading those Eric von Daniken books and those Chariot of the Gods and all that quite when they came out. I was very, very young. And UFO books and Dennis Wheatley novels and books on magic. So to me there was the high strangeness of the paranormal mysteries Fortean world. And then when I grew older, I instinctively knew that the political system or the socio-economic or the real world stuff was also its own kind of high strangeness. But I never saw the two things as being one. You have the social, cultural, economic, political high strangeness on one end of the spectrum, and then on the other end of the spectrum you had the paranormal, the Fortean stuff. All that stuff was on that side. But what happened was people started to merge them together.
When you want to abuse people, and George Orwell, I think of all the popular writers, all the writers out in the general popular sphere, the one who dealt with totalitarianism the best and most exhaustively was George Orwell. And he said when you want to abuse people, the first thing you abuse is language. That's absolutely right. And I think another thing Orwell said was that tyranny hides in vague language. That's right as well.
We live in a world of control. It's all about who controls who, and we see that reflected in ourselves, the different levels of control patterns that can be even very subtle, or even very strong, and we have this very narcissistic quality that runs through our society. I always knew something was going to happen quite big in my life. When I was in my 40s, I even kind of thought that I was going to die in my early 40s at one point. The older I got and the more kind of internal inquiry I did, I realized it was a kind of death. but it wasn't actual death where I leave my body. It was a death of my old self. And so what I've recognized and been through myself over this last couple of years is a huge, massive transition where my life does not look anything like it did two years ago.
I do think it's quite difficult to look back at what's happened in the years since 2012 and think there's been no shift of any kind. And, you know, I do wonder that maybe what all those prophecies were talking about was a kind of an underlying knowledge, as somehow a foreknowledge that we were about to enter a period of, you know, great difficulty. I don't think anybody would think that isn't the case now. Whether it relates or just coincidence, I don't know. But I was happy personally that what all that did was make me aware that I needed to be ready, that things could shift or change at any point. And even though, yeah, it wasn't the great ascension all on one day or anything like that, nonetheless, I think it put people into a state of readiness, and I'm thankful for that, as it turns out.
Humans are petty and oriented towards selfishness and being right. They're not self-reflective. People, especially in the academic world, or with an axe to grind, just like true believers, they just are tribal and their preferences are weaponized. They wouldn't investigate, like an academic would investigate the stuff you and I did. It's just not in their mindset, you know? So I really feel that that's a lot of it, you know? And it's like politics and religion. People are weaponized in their attitudes, and it's like, you're on my team or you're on the other team, instead of like, let's meet in the middle and figure out the truth.
What we need to do is actually, you know, make death invisible. And sorry, I don't mean in the way in the world. I mean, that's not the point. But that we kind of, you know, disregard this whole thing of the finality of death. I mean, even that's a hard thing to do, of course, and it's almost impossible in the culture now. But that kind of what I mean is that that's what we need to do. And that was really true, I think, of when people had what people now rather patronizingly call a simple faith, a simple belief. People did actually see that, you know, it's just a curtain you walk through, you know, and then you just continued. And I think we need to get back to that somehow or other.
The energetics of this time, I think the timing of this time is the great reveal, and I believe the human spirit will conquer.
You have no power over me. And everything then falls apart. That is my hope. That is my hope, that is the time that we're coming to, where people stand up and let the game pieces fall to the floor.